Excellent. And welcome back, everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful day. Over to you, Mike.
Good morning, everybody. Mike Mazur, Vice President of Sales and Solutions for the Cara Group. Cara is a professional services firm out of Chicago, specializing in solutions in change management, custom learning, and communications to the Fortune 500 and upper mid-market. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to Martha Soehren to give you the session today. Martha earned a PhD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies and an MBA, and she also spent 25 years in the defense industry, 13 years as an adjunct professor, and 20 years at Comcast, where for the last 15 years of her career there, she served as the Chief Talent Officer. Martha served as a chair and member of several industry and learning boards and continues to serve them in a consulting capacity. Again, very much my honor to introduce Martha Soehren. Martha, turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's so wonderful to be here with you all. First of all, happy Friday. What a great way to kind of wrap up a week of wonderful learning. I have sat in on several of the sessions this week, and I am so impressed with what L&D Careers is doing for all of us in the L&D industry. And for me to be in front of a group of L&D professionals like we have here this morning is just the best environment that there could possibly be. I want to tell you a little bit more about my story. Mike gave you a backdrop there, but I've spent about 40 years in the learning and development profession. I got my start when I was working for the Department of Army as a Department of Army civilian. One of my jobs as an analyst was to go into the classrooms in the Army service schools and validate their programs of instruction. And what that meant was to go in and ensure that the soldiers had the right number of instructors for their practical exercises or whatever it was that they were doing. Things like how to change a radiator on a Humvee, how to conduct a DoD polygraph test, or maybe how to operate in a GBVX chemical environment. So that was my start. And from that, I went on to become an efficiency expert with Department of Army, which is very much aligned with what we do in L&D. It's about being an organizational development kind of expert. And then with Comcast, I spent 20 years in learning and development. So it's a really long background that ties nicely with what you all bring to the table today. Now, we all have stories when it comes to our careers. One thing to remember, though, a job is not a career, but a career has jobs. And I like to think of those jobs as the chapters. So my challenge for you today is to think about what's next in your career story. What is that next chapter that you're going to be building? When we think about that next chapter, it happens in many ways. Sometimes it happens because we're tapped on the shoulder, or it happens because we've been planful. And I personally like being planful about what it is that I do and did with my career. And what that means is you let things happen by you rather than to you. And when you do that, it's much, much easier to follow your aspirations and to really do what you want to do. Notice I said do what you want to do, not be what you want to be. You want to chase what it is you want to do. What is that capability or that intellectual muscle that you want to build? So our conversation today is really about looking at the 3 pillars that make up our career stories, and to think about how you might walk away from here today with some things in mind on how you're going to stretch your pillars. And those pillars are the experiences that we've had, the exposures, and the education. What we need to do, though, is recognize where we are today with our career story. It's a little bit about looking in the rearview mirror. I want you to look through the front windshield today as you think about these 3 pillars, because each is very important to what it is we want to do. So in your thinking, I want you to be bold, be courageous, and be confident as you think about what's next for you. So if you want something different, if you want a new chapter, you've got to do something different. And that thing that's different could be a change in a career. It could be a change in a company. It could be a change in jobs. It could be something that you change in your current job. Like how do you look at the job you have today and you make it more? You build it working with your leader. But it could happen in various ways. Or it could actually be on top of those things I just mentioned. It could be a major pivot. I did a major pivot when I went from the Army to the corporate world. And in doing so, I was at about year 24 with Department of Army, and I knew I wanted to be a learning leader in the corporate world, and I was coming up on my 25th year. So I started planning and looking at what do I need to do to build greater capability and to build more intellectual muscle so that I will be prepared when I make the pivot from the Army to the corporate world. And an important story here that I want to share with you. Remember, I said, do what you want to do. I want you to stay in the driver's seat as you plan that next chapter. I shared with my boss, he was the president of the Army's Tank Automotive Research Development Engineering Center. And I shared with him when I started exploring and when I was thinking about making this pivot. And I got a lot of like resistance, like, you really don't want to do that. You're in a very secure environment. The government's a great place to work. And I continued the interview process and I got the offer and I walked in and I said, I have an offer and I'm going to take this job. Seriously, Martha, you really don't want to do this. Here's what we'll do for you. And there were great opportunities offered for promotion and those kind of things. But I stayed in the driver's seat. I knew what I wanted to do. Had I listened to that boss and had I fallen for all of those great things that he suggested, I would never have experienced the fabulous Comcast NBCU world, which was absolutely a great experience for me. And I had the best job in the place as the Chief Talent Development Officer. So the bottom line of my story is, think about how you can stay in the driver's seat and not let others take over your career story. Don't let others take over your chapters for you. It doesn't mean that there won't be times where you'll get tapped, but just make sure that you're leading that path. Now, what is it that you're willing to do when it comes to these three pillars? What are you willing to do? What are you willing to write down today that you're going to take away from this time together where you'll actually go make some things real in preparation for your next chapter? What I'm going to do is give some examples of activities that fall in experiences, exposure, and education. And then Mike's going to help us with an activity as he watches chat for me. But we're going to look at L&D role, and we're going to talk about what are the specific things to help this L&D professional get to where he or she wants to go. So, and if you have additional ideas on activities other than these I mentioned, please put them in chat so that people can see them, because you've probably experienced something that I won't know or that I won't have on my list. So when building capability or intellectual muscle for that next chapter, experiences are things like taking a gig assignment. Sometimes that's working within your current role or stepping aside for a few months and going to do that project. Taking on special projects. I did that several times in my career and it paid off really well for me. Think about some type of cross-functional work or even functional work in a field of study that you haven't explored before, or taking a class. That is a great way to build. And then too, as Syra and I were talking about earlier, volunteer to do something that builds on a skill set that maybe you don't necessarily have. It works fabulously for helping to build your resume. And then two, learn the business. In learning and development, we have to know the business. And so that's a really, really good experience or activity to take on. For exposures, this is getting to know people who might be able to influence or help us as we continue building our story. And some of these exposures can be with functional experts. We're in L&D. We might want to spend time with someone who is in sales. But what kind of functional experts could help you along your career journey? Or it could even be a generalist, someone who's more broad rather than vertical. Your mentors and your coaches, make sure you have mentors and coaches helping you along the way. Recognize if you have a sponsor or not for what it is you're trying to accomplish with that next chapter. Sponsors are critical to that piece. And then two, how about your champions? Have you earned champions? Those are people who watched you work and they really, really believe in you. And they're going to be a voice ahead of you as you are looking to explore that next job. And then another is external folks who are doing what you want to do. LinkedIn, as you know, is a really good place to find those functional experts or external people who are doing that function you want to hang on to next. And then for education, there's formal education. You can earn degrees. We know all of that. But there are other ways as well. One of the coolest things I did as the learning leader at Comcast was I went through the list of about 700 learning and development professionals on my team, and I selected the 5 youngest team members that I had, and I made them my reverse mentoring group. And they would meet with me at least once a month, and we would create an agenda. They can learn from me, and I would learn from them. But my goal was to get smarter about how the younger generations, how they actually operated in the research world, in the software world, the technology world, and the working environment that I was providing for them. What was it that I could do to be more helpful? And we implemented some really cool ideas from their great work. Most of that was in the software area. Now, here's the project we're going to work on with Mike, and we're only going to do this for just maybe two minutes. But using chat and thinking about this scenario, what activities would you recommend under these 3 pillars? I am an ISD, and I've been an ISD for a while, but I really want to become a manager or a leader of a team of ISDs. That's what I want for my next chapter. I talked to my boss and I asked, where do you think I really need to develop capability if I'm going to explore that? And I learned that I need to learn to manage a budget. I need to better learn the business, and I need to develop my leadership skills. So with that, what are some activities based on where you are in learning and development? What activities might you suggest to that ISD to go out and tackle, to build capability and to build intellectual muscle? Post them in chat, and Mike will help me here.
We're seeing a couple comments. Love reverse mentoring.
Nice.
Couple volunteering changed my career path.
Awesome.
Being a part of L&D Cares.
Great one.
Growth Summit. Again, talking about your volunteering comments. That's what we're seeing so far.
Nice. Last call for ideas on what this ISD might do.
Call and invite an IST manager for lunch.
Ooh, love that. Love it. Internally or externally, right?
Find a mentor or someone already in that role and share info about the role.
Fabulous.
Explore certifications at ATD.
Fabulous.
Lead some area of a local ATD chapter. Love that idea as well. Couple more on volunteering. Invest time in professional development, especially in the industry you aspire to work.
Fabulous.
Find an expert in the field and ask to shadow.
Awesome.
Our L&D Cares co-founder pipes in here. Sometimes I ask the experts I could find to walk me through a typical project. Thanks, Brandon.
Those are all really, really great ideas. You all get this. My ask of you is, probably most of you are thinking about that next chapter. What are you going to do within these 3 pillars personally to build more capability and intellectual capital? I did that before I made my pivot with all 3 of these. And a lot of the things that I did fell in those options that you just presented that Mike shared with us. So please, please tackle it. Now, how do you get your story out there? Let's talk about this for a second. There are various ways, and you've heard a lot about LinkedIn and the other ways that you can build your social network. LinkedIn probably being one of the most popular these days, but there are other ways of building your network too. And first of all, with your mentors and your coaches, and I want to distinguish between those two. I think of a coach as someone who's helping me with the job I have today. So that person is in my current chapter of my career story more often than not. However, by sharing my story and what it is I aspire to do, that coach can be a voice for me, a voice ahead of me, or a voice beside of me with leaders and others who might be hiring in the area to which I aspire. A mentor is that person who is helping me with the next chapter. The mentor is more forward-looking, while the coach is a little bit more in the moment. But both can be extremely helpful. Another is getting acquainted with some recruiters. It's not always easy to do, but I've found that when I've reached out to the HR experts to ask for names of some recruiters, and you can do it by functional area like L&D, or you can do it sometimes by the job level. But often you can get really good information and make some really good relationships so that you get a phone call when you're out there sharing your story about what it is that you want to do. And then two, another is if you see a leader with a job opening one level up from what you aspire to, reach out to that leader and say, hey, I know you have a director level job posted. I'm not ready for that job, but I am ready for a manager of ISD. And I would really love for you to keep me in mind and get my name out there if you have a manager role or if any of your peers have manager roles. It's just another way of ensuring that you get your story out there. So you build your story, you're in it now, you define what it is you want to do for your next chapter, and you make sure that you're networking and you're getting your message out there and you're using people to help you along the way. Now, what I wish for you is a really, really great next chapter. You can make it happen. I did. It's a lot of work. I did it more than once, but you can really make it happen. So my question for you is, what's next? And with that, I'll open it up for questions, Mike.
That's great. One of the comments I saw that kind of goes to what you were just saying there in your last comments was believe that you can achieve that next goal. I thought that was
Absolutely.
really, really key.
Absolutely. I love that. And in addition to believing, be resilient, because you're not always going to get a yes answer. That wasn't the case for me. But you're evaluated and judged more on how you respond to that no answer, how you respond, than the fact that you got the no answer. In other words, you can buckle down and be stronger and do more, or you can just sit back or go somewhere else and find a job.
So that's a question for me to you, Martha. So I've noticed, particularly in the L&D industry, maybe because of the nature of what we do, oftentimes L&D professionals don't feel that they are 100% there and ready for that next level or that next role. Or maybe people in other industries, when they get 60% ready, they're willing to apply for that next level job or that stretch assignment. What's your advice to everyone that's here in the session around that?
I love that question, Mike. Don't assume that you're not ready, and don't assume that it's not a good thing to apply. Apply First of all, for two reasons. One is the possibility you might be offered the job, and the other is the experience of the interview. Because as you go through the interview, you're going to learn more about what the expectations of the role are. At Comcast, I had a young lady who worked on my team, and it wasn't obvious that I was going to leave anytime soon back then, and she really wanted to become a learning leader in an organization. And so I said, you know what? Go out there and apply for learning leader jobs outside of Comcast. I know you're saying you don't want to leave Comcast, but go for the experience. And she came back and told me that was one of the best learning experiences that she had had, and that she would never have thought to do that just for the experience of learning more about what other companies expect in that learning leader role.
Great, thank you. So here's a question from the audience. How do you face your fears?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm probably a bit older than most of you, so I don't have a lot of fears. But I do spend a lot of time in reflection, and I think reflection helps me a lot, because I might reflect on a bad conversation I had with someone during the day, and I'll reflect on it, and I'll figure out how do I regroup around this so that we don't come up against that kind of conversation again. So I think it's really just internally assessing, how do you get through the situation? I was on a call with coaching someone this morning in Florida where an employee is afraid of her leader, and I was trying to help her get through that. It doesn't mean that we don't have fear sometimes, but find someone you trust and talk through it, and maybe role play. Role playing is a great way to get past a fear. I do that a lot with folks. I did some of it yesterday with a young lady. But role playing with someone you trust is a good idea. And it's probably a good thing to just scoot away from your company to do that, if you fear.
That's great. So another question, who's one person you remember that helped you get to where you got to, and how did they do it?
Oh my gosh. Well, there were two people. The first one was my dad, because I could never do anything wrong, and whatever it was I wanted to do, he would always say, oh, you can make that happen. So I have a very positive approach towards life because of him. But the person in the workplace who helped me the most was Mr. Robert Swint. He was the deputy commander of the Tank Automotive Command when I worked there. And he so believed in me. He so believed in me that he suggested that I step away from the government and try a leadership role, because it was something I aspired to do. And I did. For 2 years, I went into a not-for-profit leading HR and quality and training. And it was the best experience in the world, because I was with social workers, people who were trained to be social workers, not business leaders. So I learned a whole lot from that. But I'll never forget the day that I left to take that 2-year stint, because he retired while I was gone over that 2-year period. We still stay in touch, though. But as he was leaving, he turned his head and he looked back at me. And he said, Martha, I will see you in print someday. And that message so stuck with my head that when I was in print for the first time, I sent Mr. Swint a copy of the magazine. The whole point being, people don't have to always do things that physically move you. It can be an emotional movement like Mr. Swint did for me. And it was quite a bit of a mental movement, but he helped me more than he will ever realize, despite the fact that I tell him in every Christmas card I send him.
That's wonderful.
Great question. I love that question.
Another question for the audience. What are your next steps?
Wow. Thank you for that question. We were talking a little bit about this in our staging for this session today. I'm at the point in my life where I'm gifting my time intentionally to people who reach out or they just need a little help. I'm helping a CLO who's new to her role, and she just needs some of the basics. So I give her an hour a week. I do mentoring. I still sit on some boards for Comcast. I used to think I wanted to write a book, but I kind of changed my mind on that, because I think having time to spend face to face with people is satisfying that old need of mine, that old chapter that I kind of decided not to write.
That's great. All right. Well, we're at our time. Martha, thank you very much. And we do have some additional questions that I think we could still answer as we go off stage here.
Okay, be glad to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks to
Thank you
all
all
of
for
you.
joining.
My pleasure.